So the San Antonio Spurs have had a weird season, but even with all that, they've won 6 in a row, and I think that they are a scary team for pretty much anybody in the Western Conference that is not the Golden State Warriors, because the fact that they've managed to be one of the best offenses in the league, even though everything they do in terms of three-point attempts and the amount of post-ups and the amount of offensive rebounds and the amount of free throws they get, none of it would suggest that they should be a great offense, and yet they are. I think a lot of it is because Pop has embraced what Aldridge and Derozan are good at, which is mid-range jumpers, post-ups, pick and rolls. Credit to DeMar DeRozan for improving his playmaking. They've also been really fortunate with Bryn Forbes and Derek White at the point guard / any guard, wing positions, whatever. Both of them can go off the dribble. Both of them can make shots. Patty Mills and Marco Bellinelli both have guts, so where they're going to take some reckless shots that'll go in, and Patty is another guy who can go off the bounce, and Rudy Gay has done a great job of fitting into the Spurs system and moving away from the bad habits that plagued him earlier on in his career. And I think what's funny with the Spurs is that even though they're the least shooting three-point team in the league, number one, they have the best three-point percentage. Number two is the guys who should be shooting threes for this team are still shooting threes, and they're still going to scare you in a playoff series. Between Bryn Forbes, who shoots 5 a game, Patty shoots 5 a game, and not all of those are just catch and shoots. Bellinelli shoots 5, and we know how he runs around the floor like a JJ Redick, so you always got to pay attention to him. Bertans, he shoots 4 a game, so I mean, it's not like this team just doesn't shoot threes. They still shoot 25 a game, so if you decide to load up on DeRozan or Aldridge, they're still going to be able to make threes. So this is not a matter of, oh, how are they going to score enough points? I think they're definitely going to be able to score enough, and you always have to include Popovich when you think about the Spurs in the playoffs. I mean, we saw him figure out how to defend the high-powered Rockets offense and get to the Western Conference Finals against the Warriors, and if it's not for Kawhi going down, I mean, I think the Warriors still win that series, but I think it would have been a hell of a series. So you give him a team to game plan against, and I think these guys could beat anyone outside of the Warriors, of course, in the West. And I think that's because what Pop is going to do is he's going to find a weakness for every team, and he's going to attack it as much as he can. You know, we see some coaches where they get kind of wishy-washy, where, you know, like, I mean, obviously these guys are coaches, so they got to have some sort of leg up on us normal people. But when the entire basketball community on Twitter and every journalist and every analyst would suggest, why didn't they just try to get this switch a million times or whatever, then I think we're all onto something. And that does happen in playoff series. It never happens with the Spurs, okay? Usually what happens with the Spurs is we're all like, oh crap, we didn't even think of that, because of course Popovich is smarter than all of us. So I'm sure that's going to happen. As far as things that I can think of, well, as of right now, the Spurs would be facing the Rockets in the first round. And I think, number one, Popovich would not be dumb, and he would realize that, oh yeah, James Harden's actually not a bad one-on-one defender anymore. Now, I guess if there's anybody who actually can post up on Harden on a switch, it probably could be Aldridge, because he's got that turnaround jumper and all that. But I think Popovich would make Harden actually move on defense, because there's still ways you can do it, between slip screens and starting him from the corner and having him move around a little bit. There's still ways that you can go at James Harden, even if the Rockets run a switching defense. And I think Pop is going to find ways to do that. You can also be a little bit more physical with James Harden in the playoffs, and I think Pop would definitely have his guys on that one. He would lay into them a million times, keep your hands down when you're defending this dude. And I know every coach is going to say that, but since Popovich's team actually beat the Rockets in a series, and granted the Rockets weren't as good as they are now, but they were still really damn good, then I'm going to trust that they'll at least not do the stupid things again. Now, before I dive into other teams and that type of thing, we should talk about the Spurs defense. Overall, they have not been good this season. They're 20th in defensive rating or whatever. But looking at certain things, I feel like there's a chance they've been a little unlucky this year with their defense because they give up, I think it's like the second least amount of shots in the restricted area, and the only team that's better than them in that is the Bucks. And of course, the Bucks defense has been amazing. The Spurs also force teams to take a lot of mid-range jumpers, and while the Spurs may love those shots, the rest of the league doesn't. So making teams do what they don't want to do would typically suggest that you're maybe not a horrible defensive team. And while they do give up quite a few threes, similar to the Bucks, most of the threes the Spurs give up are at the top of the key, which is still the least efficient three-point shot. Granted, it's still a three-pointer, but that's a lot better than leaving guys wide open in the corners, you know? And there's even some other things. They turn the ball over the least in the entire league, which means they're not giving up those easy, fast break points or whatever. They also commit the least amount of fouls in the NBA as well, and they're among the best defensive rebounding teams in the league, so they're not giving up a million offensive boards. Yeah, it is weird that they've still been a bottom-tier defensive team. Now, even with all this, teams could still attack LaMarcus Aldridge, and I don't think there's a single really good defender on this team. Again, I've said this before, throwing Danny Green into the Derozan trade was pretty weird. Again, I think Popovich, in one specific series against one team that he can game plan for, could have these guys playing respectable enough defense by just doing everything right, I guess, in the sense of leaving the guys who you're supposed to leave open, putting the right defenders on the right guys in terms of height, in terms of weight, in terms of who's the star player and all that. Just basic things that other coaches sometimes don't do. But even with all of that, we do have to look at Derozan, because that guy has crapped his pants in the playoffs a few years in a row now. And while I think Popovich will use him in more creative ways when he needs to than Dwayne Casey did, this is still a thing. I mean, I typically don't get into the whole mental side of this because I think a lot of it's stupid. The idea of this guy wanted it more than this guy because these guys are professional basketball players, like, excuse me. But it does seem like sometimes DeRozan gets overwhelmed by the moment and kind of freaks out. I mean, if we look at when he went back to Toronto, at the very last play of the game, he had a driving lane on some dude, and he picked up his dribble and he passed it out or whatever. And it was just a really weird thing because I've seen DeRozan finish through contact a million times in his career. And then it's like, oh, wait a minute, this guy who's disappointed in so many playoffs has this game that he was probably really amped up for because it's back in Toronto. It's the biggest play of the game, and he does something weird. And I really wasn't that surprised. So DeRozan's just going to have to grow some nuts, is the best way to put it. Sure, Pop can put him in good positions. He can get him on switches. He can get him 6 feet from the basket on a post-up. He can get him cutting to the rim. He can get him ahead of steam going to the basket on an early screen or whatever. He can do some DeRozan Aldridge pick and pops to confuse big guys. DeRozan's still got to be ready for the moment. But still, I do think Popovich and the talent this team has could freak out some teams in the playoffs. I mean, if we look at other teams, let's say the Spurs end up facing OKC in round one, which is possible right now. Give Popovich a game plan against Westbrook, and Westbrook might miss 20 shots a game. I mean, we remember when they beat Miami way back when, they just dared D-Wade and LeBron to shoot basically every single time, and I mean, one of those series went 7, and the other one they killed him. Granted, they also killed him because Dwayne Wade was on one leg and LeBron got cramps, but by game 3, Miami had no answer for what the Spurs were doing, so if Popovich can dare those guys to shoot, then I think he's going to dare Westbrook to shoot. I also think he's going to dare all those guys on OKC to make shots. If we look at the Spurs against, like, the Nuggets, I think Aldridge's shooting could really freak out Jokic. Granted, Jokic's shooting could also freak out Aldridge, but I'm going to give Aldridge, coached by Greg Popovich, a better chance of defending that than I am with Mike Malone and Jokic. I should also mention Jakob Poeltl's existence because he'll make a difference for the different bigs around the league, because Aldridge doesn't technically even start at power forward. Or he does start at power forward, he doesn't start at center. So yeah, where I'm at with San Antonio is they're going to be a tough out. Popovich is going to do the right things, and assuming Derozan doesn't fold under the pressure, this team's got a lot of stuff they can go to. There's a lot of versatile wings. There's at least 2 guys who can go off the dribble. Well, more like 3 guys if you include Patty Mills. About 3 to maybe 4 guys who can go off the dribble, play in a pick and roll, pull up for mid-rangers and all that, and make some shots. There's quite a few shooters you got to deal with, even if these guys still shoot the least amount of threes in the league. And you got to deal with Popovich, and I don't care what coach you have, he's not as good as Pop. So